How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and of course in this video we're going to closely monitor these two tropical disturbances which have a good chance of developing into a tropical cyclone. Taking a look at this first disturbance in the water vapor imagery, we do see that there's a decent amount of convective activity on the southern side of this center of circulation. We're going to need to see the convective activity blow up a little bit more surrounding the center of circulation for me to say confidently that this will develop into a tropical storm. But as of right now, the moisture seems a little bit too lopsided at this time, and we're not seeing exactly enough convective activity over a larger area. And we do see there's a decent amount of dry air just to the west of this storm system. So I'll say, at least for right now, the chance remains low to potentially moderate for the as this continues to head further westward into the main development region. The computer models been shifting their forecasts over the next several days regarding the exact strength and trajectory of this tropical disturbance, but with this much convective activity, even despite the dry air, the chance always exists. So in the Caribbean, you need to pay close attention to that possibility. And moving on to this second disturbance, we see that there's a lot more convective activity. We do see a blow up of thunderstorm activity, and this, I will say, this has a slightly better chance of developing. We do see there's quite a bit of moisture surrounding it. It won't deal with the dry air a little bit further westward, but the good news is that at least with this disturbance, the current computer models have a large consensus that this should move northward, mainly out to sea, which I do believe is the most likely scenario at this time. But still, we have plenty of convective activity, so I'll say there's a moderate chance that this tropical disturbance will develop. And of course, I must point out that even beyond the 7-day mark, while the forecast does become more uncertain around that time period, there are some growing agreements between the computer models that we could see reformation somewhere in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, more specifically with this tropical disturbance. Right now, we do see the National Hurricane Center is giving a low chance of tropical cyclone development over the next 7 days. However, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we do see the chance rise, because the GFS model and the European model, especially with this tropical disturbance right here, are borderline taking this tropical disturbance to tropical storm status, if not slightly above tropical storm status. So I do believe the chance will be higher for this tropical disturbance. For this tropical disturbance, I will say that at least within the next 7 days, the chance will still stay low, because there's plenty of dry air, like I'm gonna show you right now. But it's definitely gonna need to keep tabs on this tropical disturbance even beyond the 7-day mark, because there could be that possibility we could see redevelopment in the Caribbean or even the Gulf of Mexico in the more long-term future. Let me show you guys the European models for latest run for today. Here's what the latest run of the European model is forecasting at this time, and continuing to move forward with the forecast. Here's our first tropical disturbance, and our second tropical disturbance is this area of moisture right here. We do see a lot more convective activity compared to this tropical disturbance. And moving forward with the forecast, we do see that while there is a decent amount of convective activity, the dry air just becomes a little bit too much for this tropical disturbance to handle, where we pretty much just see this area of moisture fizzle out, because there's an influx of dry air that'll come to the north with the north side of this second tropical disturbance that will pretty much stabilize the atmosphere right over the eastern or the western half of the main development region. For this to have a difficult time to form, the European model still does expect an 1009 millibar low pressure system by the time we approach the Friday timeframe, just off the Windward Islands, but fizzles it out for the most part. But we could see it, this potentially reform, or at least re-intensify, where we do see a little bit more convective activity. So the Windward Islands definitely needs to watch out for that possibility of heavier rainfall. And overall, for much of the Caribbean, we do see the moisture definitely enhances by the time we approach Monday, August 21st timeframe by early next week. And another thing I want to point out is there's going to be a piece of moisture that's going to be just to the west of this first tropical disturbance that, while at least initially will have a difficult time developing thanks to the dry air I just mentioned that's over the main development region, we do see it could enter an area where the moisture will enhance, the atmosphere will destabilize, and that could create just enough of an upward motion over the Gulf of Mexico for the possibility of a tropical storm to exist over the Gulf of Mexico, and could impact the Gulf Coast states. And even if this doesn't necessarily develop into a tropical cyclone, we still see heavier rainfall over Louisiana, over portions of Texas, and for some areas in Texas, this certainly may be good news because some of you guys are currently in a drought. But however, there's still a possibility you could experience too much rain with a tropical wave like this. So we're definitely gonna keep tabs on this tropical disturbance over the next several days, because we have other computer models such as the CMC model wanting to develop this into a tropical cyclone by the time we approach early next week. Tuesday, August 22nd, we do see the millibar pressure drops down to 997 millibars at landfall, making landfall somewhere around Corpus Christi. Of course, the forecast hour is very far out, and this computer model isn't necessarily as reliable as the European model, but even the European model acknowledges the possibility that there's at least going to be a tropical wave as we approach early next week in the Gulf of Mexico. So Gulf Coast states, at least be aware of that possibility, and there could be just enough. It really all depends on the wind shear, because the wind shear will be a little bit iffy with this storm system. Let me move back to the European model, and let's go to the forecasted wind shear over the next several days. And we do see that at least for these first two disturbances coming off the West African coast, let me just start with that first. We do see the wind shear will remain relatively light for the most part, and that's pretty much going to be the main thing that will at least give these two tropical disturbances a possibility of developing. And in fact, the strong upper level winds, like I said, will only enhance the outflow of these two storm systems, which makes me believe that we're likely going to see that there is at least a good possibility of tropical cyclone development. But let me go to the 12Z run of August 14th to give you guys a more long-term forecast. But moving forward towards this potential tropical wave in the Gulf of Mexico, we see that there's going to be a small area where the wind shear will be relatively light. There's going to be an upper level high located just upwards of the tropical wave, which will enhance the outflow for this to potentially have the possibility of developing. But we do see there's a strong amount of wind shear surrounding it, so this forecast could easily change where the wind shear would just be too much for this tropical wave to handle. But I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days. Just be prepared for that possibility of a tropical wave along the Gulf Coast. And in terms of these two tropical disturbances, like I said, for this first one, the dry air just seems to be a little bit too much for this tropical disturbance to handle. And for the second one, the wind shear, while it will be light at least initially, the wind shear will greatly increase as this continues to head further northward, and that's a current agreement that the computer models are having with this tropical disturbance, where they want to steer this further northward. Because if we were to take a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly, we do see there's going to be just enough of a weakness in ridging where we see a trough just off the Europe coast, which will weaken the ridging just to the north of it, and that will allow this tropical disturbance to have an open area to where it can move northward, which is certainly good news because it wouldn't bring any long-term impacts to the Caribbean islands. So I'll say most likely we're going to see this tropical disturbance move out to sea, which is certainly good news. But in terms of a possibility we could see a tropical storm out of this, I'll give it a moderate possibility, but it won't really matter that much if it goes out to sea. So that's certainly good news. Here's what the GFS model is stating, and we do see the GFS model is taking a fairly, okay, this is the GFS model. So here's what the GFS model is stating, is forecasting over the next several days. We do see it's taking a very interesting approach where it wants to bring at least more moisture for this initial tropical wave, but doesn't really bring enough moisture to where it has a chance of developing. And for this second tropical disturbance, we actually do see this develop into a tropical storm, but like I said, it won't really matter at that point because it'll likely move out to sea. And the GFS model eventually does expect the dry air to completely fizzle out this tropical disturbance, which is certainly good news. Now, moving our focus to the Caribbean, like I said, expect an influx of moisture to move in right around late this week into early next week, where the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Cuba could get involved with very heavy rainfall. And we do see that there's just going to be a lot more moisture over the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean as we approach this weekend, which makes me concerned that we could see an enhanced possibility of tropical cyclone development a little bit further eastward, and a little bit further westward and a little bit closer to home. So at least be aware of the possibility of a tropical wave along the Gulf Coast, like I said, with the European model's forecast. Here are what the current ensemble members of the European model are stating at this time. And this is exactly the point I've been making, is that while this first tropical disturbance will have a low chance, at least initially, of intensifying into tropical disturbance, look at beyond the 7-day mark. We not only see a lot of ensemble members wanting to develop a tropical storm, but in fact a strong hurricane moving northward just north of the Caribbean, and some of the ensemble members do directly impact the Caribbean islands in the more long-term future. Now, of course, take this with a huge grain of salt. Don't panic at all just yet, because it's very much in the long-term future, and the ensemble members do change their forecast like crazy when it's this far out. So definitely don't take it completely seriously just yet, but at least be aware that that possibility does exist to where we could see re-intensification after it might initially weaken in the main development region once this approaches the Caribbean islands. And we do see some ensemble members, interestingly enough, as well in the Gulf of Mexico, wanting to develop a tropical storm and take a landfall towards Texas in the long-term future. So definitely a lot to watch over the islands and the Gulf Coast, and I'll make sure to keep you guys updated, because of course when it's this far out, expect a lot of changes. And for this second tropical disturbance, all of them take it out to sea, which is certainly good news. We definitely don't want to see it come close to the Caribbean or the United States, and it's very unlikely once it moves this far up north it'll take a journey out to the west without being deterred by the strong westerly winds that are just to the north of this Bermuda Azores high. So that's certainly good news. And here's a look at the GFS ensemble members for right now, and we do see a lot of them don't even want to develop a tropical storm going towards the Caribbean, or want to re-intensify this first low pressure system once it approaches the Caribbean, mainly because the dry air the GFS model all this time been very favorable towards much more dry air existing over the main development region than the European model. So of course the GFS model is less confident we're going to see a tropical cyclone move into the Caribbean, but I'll still lean a little bit more to the European model, because like you've been seeing this hurricane season, probably a GFS model been all over the place, and it's been taking several days for the GFS model to be more in line with what the European model is stating. So I'll still lean a little bit more towards what the European model is stating at this time, but don't disregard the GFS model either. It still has a reliable track record. And for this second disturbance, we do see very similar to the European model, not much to worry about. Most likely this disturbance will go out to sea, and we do have several ensemble members wanting to develop a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico, but again, a little bit less confident and a little bit more all over the place compared to the European model, where when it comes to the exact trajectory of where this tropical disturbance will go. So here's my overall forecast when it comes to the possibility of a tropical storm developing somewhere in the northern Atlantic. So in terms of the possibility of a tropical storm over the main development region, at least for the next 7 days, you likely shouldn't expect it. It could be a different story beyond the 7-day mark, but at least for the near future, most likely the dry air will be a little bit too much for this tropical wave to handle. And for this second disturbance, I'll say the chance is definitely higher since it has a lot more convective activity surrounding it. It should be able to push off the dry air. So I do believe that that certainly does have a better chance, but it will likely move out to sea, which is certainly good news. And in terms of a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico, still has yet to be seen, of course, but I will say there is an increasing possibility the Gulf Coast states will experience heavier rainfall associated with, at the very least, a tropical wave. A tropical storm certainly is in the realm of possibility, so keep that in mind along the Gulf Coast as well. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.